As of April 1st, 2023, it has been nearly a decade since the last sighting of Kris Kremers, 21, and Lisanne Froon, 22. The two young women were friends who worked at the same café together in Amersfoort, Netherlands. They planned a 6-week-long vacation from the Netherlands to Panama, hoping to improve their Spanish and offer volunteer help for the locals, in addition to sightseeing. After deciding to go for a hike one afternoon, Kris and Lisanne disappeared, having their belongings and select body parts turn up 10 weeks later. It has now been 9 years since these women disappeared, and time only seems to bring more questions than answers. Nearly a decade of speculation, odd circumstances, and rumors have all left many people who are invested in this case divided on the outcome. Kris and Lisanne had already been elsewhere in Panama for a couple weeks when they arrived in Boquete. Boquete is a small town situated in western Panama, surrounded by dense jungles, mountains, and river valleys. The culture in Boquete is lively with frequent musical performances and a weekly arts market. With a population of approximately 20,000 people, about a fifth being expats mostly from North America, the town radiates a close-knit, small-town feel. Once in Boquete, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon arrived at a school where they made plans to volunteer, but were turned away upon arrival and were told to return the next week. This change of plans freed their schedule, so new activities were planned, one of them being hiking the El Pianista Trail on April 1st. Though multiple locals say they witnessed the women leaving for their hike sometime after 1 p.m., the timestamps on Lisanne's camera placed the two at the trailhead at an estimated 11:08 a.m. Because Lisanne had never traveled further than Germany, documenting a trip this far on her new Canon PowerShot camera was important to her. She took many great photos highlighting their trip, the ones at the start of this specific hike being those of the path and of her and Kris. There are a handful of images that document the women's trek up to the Mirador, the outlook. Regardless of the time they left, it took them just under 2 hours to reach the Mirador, where they stayed for at least 15 minutes taking celebratory pictures. El Pianista is a narrow hiking trail that winds through the rolling hills and dense jungles of Panama, located 4 kilometers north of Boquete. With an elevation of more than 600 meters, El Pianista is located within a cloud forest. Much of the path takes place inside a cloud, should it be rainy or humid enough. If you stay on the path, it is carved out and should be fairly straightforward. Vegetation thrives in damp, humid rainforest environments like this, so plants beyond the path regularly become too thick to traverse without the aid of a machete. Once reaching the Mirador, if you are lucky enough to be out of the clouds as Kris and Lisanne were, you are welcomed with the breathtaking view of the surrounding area. On a sunny day, visibility will be far enough for you to view both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans from the Mirador. When it was time to leave, instead of taking the south path that would lead them back to Boquete, Kris and Lisanne ended up taking the north one off of the Mirador. These two paths are apparently distinguishable, the Boquete side of the mountain having a view of nearby town, Alto Boquete, while the other is purely vegetation. This means it is unlikely that Kris and Lisanne accidentally took the wrong path. They were also given the advice that they needed to turn around on El Pianista after reaching the Mirador, so it is unlikely they were attempting to loop around by following the trail further. The north path is one that is used almost exclusively by locals, and is much more difficult to navigate without preparation and a guide. A handful of photos of their time on the north path were taken, including photo 508, which shows Kris standing on a rock while crossing a stream, turned to face slightly toward the camera as if Lisanne were calling her name. This is the last photo from Lisanne's camera that day, taken at 1:54 p.m. After this point, the timeline becomes even less clear and more things are subject to speculation. Between 1:54 and 4:39 p.m., something happened that caused the women to place an emergency call. The call was made from Kris's iPhone 4, and the caller dialed 112, the emergency services number in the European Union. Another one was placed shortly after from Lisanne's Samsung Galaxy at 4:51 p.m., also dialing 112. These calls failed to connect. When Kris and Lisanne failed to show up for an appointment they arranged with a local guide on the morning of April 2nd, he would alert their host family and authorities of their disappearance. Their families were called at around 6 p.m. and informed that the pair had not returned to their host family since the day before. Hans Kremers, Kris's father, recalls how he tried to get in contact with Kris on the 2nd. He sent a message asking how she was and asking for a message in return, but would never receive a response. Meanwhile, more emergency calls were being attempted from Kris and Lisanne's phones, starting at about 7 a.m. 112 is continuously called until 10:52 a.m., when 911, the Panamanian emergency services number, is finally dialed. No meaningful connection was ever made from either of their phones, though there was a brief moment with Lisanne's phone connected on the 2nd. This connection was so weak and brief that the women were probably unaware the call received a signal. On April 3rd, SINAPROC, or Sistema Nacional de Protección Civil, search teams started searching the jungle surrounding El Pianista. Families of Kris and Lisanne arrived in Phuket on April 6th. Kris and Lisanne's phones were being used throughout the week following their disappearance, but none of this would be known to investigators at that time. At first, attempts to reach emergency services were made, but later it turned into checking the signal, or time, with multiple attempts made each day. A unique event on April 3rd indicates that on Kris's phone, the contact of their host mother Miriam was searched for on WhatsApp before the phone was powered off.
My men say no be here, but in my heart maybe got some hope that is maybe a little possibility. Try maybe some people with the bad intention maybe take the girl, you know. I noticed some days in this mountain still.
Searches continued, and a month later the parents of Kris and Lisanne raised the reward money to $30,000 USD. No trace of the woman was found, and the investigation began to fizzle out until 10 weeks later on June 11th, the backpack that Lisanne and Kris had been wearing was found. A woman from Alto Romero, a small community north of Phuket, went to the nearby Culebra River to bathe and found the bag on the shore of the river. The bag was in fair condition, though still showed signs of wear and tear. Within this bag, the pair's bras, phones, sunglasses, and other personal items were found. Lisanne's Canon PowerShot was also found. It appears that there was one photo taken after photo 508, photo 509. This photo was mysteriously deleted either intentionally by connecting the memory card to a computer or by a malfunctioning of the camera, probably when it failed to take a video. Photo 509 becomes the missing link between Kris and Lisanne's hike and the events that were to follow. Lisanne's camera was examined, and it was discovered that on April 8th, a week after their hike on El Pianista, 100 photos were taken somewhere in a Panamanian jungle between the hours of about 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. They all show dense foliage illuminated by the flash of the camera. It appears to be raining. Some photos show debris like red plastic grocery bags attached to branches or shredded parts of their map resting on large rocks. One photo shows the back of Kris's head. These photos are taken mostly by a stationary photographer, pivoting as if to take photos of the surroundings. Reddit user Needed Monster has stitched most of the night photos into a panorama, painting a picture of the location and how these photos were taken. Most of these images were taken at least 10 seconds apart from each other. The discovery of the backpack led to more searches along the Culebra River, which resulted in the discovery of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon's remains. Only small parts of their bodies were ever located. 2 bones belonging to Kris were the only ones ever found, her pelvis and a rib. Her pelvis was broken, almost in half, and her bones contained high levels of phosphorus, which was not present in the soil surrounding the riverbed. A shattered foot still tied securely in its boot, a tibia, a femur, and 28 more bone fragments belonging to Lisanne were found as well. The remains of her leg showed Lisanne suffered from periostitis, a condition caused by the swelling of the connective tissue surrounding the bone, caused by overexertion. From this, it can be determined that she was walking for long periods of time and distance before she passed away. Her remains appeared to be in a fresher state of decomposition than Kris's. Lisanne's bones did not appear to have the same high levels of phosphorus. Despite being found in the river, there were no signs of wear and tear on the bones, man-made or natural, suggesting that they hadn't been in the area for very long. Kris's jean shorts were also found along the river. Contrary to what many sources have reported, Kris's shorts were not found neatly folded on a rock by the river. Photos recently were leaked that show Kris's shorts were found caught on a tree branch, partially submerged in the Culebra River. Panama officials closed the case of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon in March of 2015, declaring the two dead of a hiking accident. Kris and Lisanne's remains were returned to their families and buried in Rusthof Cemetery in Leusden, Netherlands. A memorial was erected at the Mirador in memory of Kris and Lisanne. While there is plenty to debate surrounding the outcome of the women, the families of Kris and Lisanne have made peace with the assumption that their loved ones were lost in the jungle and passed away due to a hiking accident. So what happened? While Kris and Lisanne were warned to turn back at the Mirador or bring a guide, it was a beautiful sunny day, and the women had made it to their destination quite quickly on their own. El Pianista is already an out-and-back trail. What if they decided to go a little further out? They still had ample sunlight, and El Pianista was easy enough to navigate that maybe the rest of the path was too, in their minds. They were likely experiencing hiker's high if this was the case. While most of the forest alongside the path of El Pianista is too dense to navigate sans machete, continuing on the north path that Kris and Lisanne started down eventually transitions between jungle and open hilly fields, making it easy to lose the path if you don't know your way. By the time they realized they had gone too far, they could have already been kilometers off their original course. Following flowing water to civilization is a well-known survival rule, even to someone with limited wilderness experience. If they had gotten lost off the trail, it is possible Lisanne and Kris knew this rule and decided to follow the first stream they came across, possibly the Culebra or one of its tributaries, to find their way back to Boquete. The only problem with this plan would be that the Culebra flows north, away from Boquete. The woman would likely be unaware of the river's direction of flow and incorrectly assumed by following it, Boquete would be right around the corner. The SIM pin on Kris's iPhone was never entered after April 5th, and Lisanne's remains appeared fresher than those of Kris. Could this mean Kris passed away first, causing Lisanne to attempt one last desperate hike to safety? The periostitis in Lisanne's leg may suggest this. Cineproc search teams searched their night searches on April 7th. Were the nighttime photos taken during the early morning of April 8th an attempt to signal a rescue? Maybe being too weak to call out, they used the flash of Lisanne's camera to attempt to signal search teams. Unfortunately, the foliage is too thick for that small of a flash to pass through. The night photos could have otherwise been a marker for Kris's body had Lisanne planned her last desperate hike to safety. She could have eventually wanted to return to lay her friend to rest. Why were Kris and Lisanne's garments found, but their bodies were not? Does this indicate a third party removing them? Did Kris and Lisanne remove the garments themselves? Did Kris also take her shorts off because of discomfort? Or could an alternative use for them have been a makeshift pillow while camped out at the night photo location? The inconsistencies between witness statements, connections between locals, and the group of people that continuously show up in the case, a handful of whom are now dead themselves, may raise suspicion to some. To others, a town of 20,000 people means you have a limited number of individuals you are aged to hang out with, forcing the formation of tight-knit friend groups. Due to all the inconsistencies in the case and so little evidence of the women being found, has left us asking the question of was it a morbid murder cover-up by a third party, or simply a close-knit small town discombobulated from the tragic disappearance of two bright young women. As more fine-tuned details leak about this case, such as an attempt to reach Miriam or the state of Kris's shorts, the lost theory starts to overtake the foul play one. How did Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon spend the last days of their lives? What is the most plausible explanation for the night photos? What evidence keeps you from making a conclusive decision on this case?